So, Araman, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Thanks for your response to this selection from a documentary about Francisco Varela that I uploaded. Um, he talks about the scientific conception of consciousness, which is basically it's consciousness is depicted as some kind of information processor. They can be modeled in a third person or objective or mechanistic sense. And he says that this is inadequate, that considering consciousness only as a mechanism, considering it only from the third person perspective, neglects that which is essential to it, the first person, subjectivity itself. And Varela was certainly, for most of his life, deeply engaged with Buddhist teachings and practice and meditation, and much of his scientific work as a neuroscientist and a biologist was to make room for an investigation or a method of investigation into how the brain works that took into consideration the experiential component just as seriously as the physiological component. He developed something called neurophenomenology, which is a program of experiment into the workings of the brain in relation to the mind, or to put it in other terms, an attempt to correlate neurological function with experiential reports. So in other words, to try to bridge the gap between the third and first person perspectives on the phenomenon of human experience. And I think that Varela was directly influenced by Whitehead's ontology and metaphysics. I've never read Varela speak specifically of him, but the presentation I gave in the course I took on Whitehead last semester and the paper that I wrote about it were an attempt to make explicit the connections between the scientific theories of Varela and the ontology of Whitehead. And certainly the sense that presentational immediacy and causal efficacy, or to simplify those terms, mind and matter, are for Whitehead intrinsically related. They each interpenetrate one another. They require one another to be what they are. Instead of mind and matter, we could also call these possibility and actuality, or the future and the past, materiality and mentality, the real and the ideal. Each of these, subject and object, they're necessarily related. They have a polar relationship to one another. And in the paper I wrote about this, I tried to describe and analyze why at the same time synthesize these two poles in terms of Aristotle's four causes, the material, efficient, formal, and final causes. Science began with Aristotle in Greece, and as you pointed out, in the Renaissance, it kind of diverged, became a bit more Platonic, and you got this resurgence of mathematics as the ultimate language. And this led to Newtonian physics and to eventually what became the modern understanding of science, which, because it has become such an abstract description of reality in terms of imposed physical laws and um, electromagnetic wave equations and so forth. Science, or our knowledge of the objective world, has been constructed such that it is completely opposite our subjective human experience. And so when we're told by science that we have no free will and that the brain is basically a mechanism, the mind is a computer, we're kind of confused, because of course our actual experience, our embodied reality that we participate in on a day-to-day basis is in complete contradiction with this scientific description. So our subjective experience and our objective knowledge cannot be reconciled. That's sort of the modern predicament. And different people deal with this dilemma in different ways. But I think what Whitehead and what Varela and a lot of the other thinkers that I'm interested in, who are able to see the dead end which is inherent in this dualistic way of thinking, they point out that these two poles, mind and matter, are related aspects of a single process. They're the organs of a whole organism, which operates of itself. It's self-organizing. And I'll post a link to the paper that I wrote to try to synthesize the thought of Varela and Whitehead, the science of Varela with the ontology of Whitehead. I'd definitely love to hear your feedback on it. But Varela also talked about, in the video that you're responding to, reincarnation. And you're right that, at least in my reading of Whitehead, I didn't come across any specific mention of the potential for consciousness to survive the death of its physical occasion, or the physical aspect of its occasion. But I think there's this curious tendency in a lot of spiritual circles to criticize the Cartesian dualism between mind and matter, or the soul and the body, but then at the same time covertly assert it in their belief in the reincarnation of their personality from lifetime to lifetime. Because you do need to essentialize the personality associated with your body in this life in order to think that it reincarnates into different bodies throughout different lifetimes. And when Varela says that consciousness, or this core subtle consciousness, is not personal, I think he's trying to point out that we should avoid sort of unconsciously assuming this Cartesian dualism between mind and body, and so not think that what reincarnates is our individual soul, and that somehow we have a personal stake in how we reincarnate next. And I think what Varela is pointing out is that the distinction we make between our private experience and our public expression of that experience is not an ultimate one, but rather a dynamic one. The relation between inner and outer, between subject and object, between mind and matter, is constantly in flux. It's constantly this process of transaction. This inner spirit is constantly giving to the outer world, which this is why there is a continual becoming. The cosmos is whole, but it also perpetually lacks something, and so it continues moving forward, lured to the potential of something more, something greater. And that's why there's a mental and a physical component. The physical component is just the habit the habitual remembering of what has already happened, and the mental component is that which is lowered into the future, which recognizes the potential. And these two, the past and the future, mind and matter, they require one another. So to try to separate them is inevitably going to be a frustrating game of cat and mouse, more like a dog chasing its own tail. But thanks for your response, and I'm noticing that you've made a couple other responses to some of my videos that I hadn't even seen yet, because they didn't actually attach to the video you were responding to of mine, so I'm going to go back and watch some of those. So yeah, thanks for listening.